as I'm listening to this again, and as Eric said, I've followed this for quite some time here. Everything is based on a lie. It is based on a lie, and it's supported by a lie. It's propagandized by a lie. It just everything is a lie about the whole thing. But one thing that I've not really heard touched about a whole lot, you were mentioning about teaching your child his gender, his sexual identity, and you got to read through Genesis, but you got to stop at a certain point. And nobody's talked about this as being a religious liberty issue. And I want to talk about that just a little bit because religious liberty is such an important thing in the state of Texas. And has anything been done on this as a religious liberty issue?
It's very interesting. We raise the religious liberty issue as the main issue at trial. Mm-hmm. It doesn't appear anywhere in the court's finding of facts. One of the things about Texas, and I think this is true in most states, parental rights actions in the appeals courts have just basically have almost no success.
Right.
Religious rights tests in the appeals courts have lots of success. Mm-hmm. And I think the family court judges go to great lengths to keep any religious, any appealable religious findings out of their rulings, so you can't take them up on appeal. But this was a central issue. I mean, this is something that the family courts have still not resolved, right? What happens if you have two Christians that are married? And I'll take this into another context. They divorce. The mother decides that she wants to raise the children in Islam. And the father decides that he wants to remain Christian. How do we resolve these things?
Right.
We have no answer on how to resolve these things. Right. So here we have a case where we're all Orthodox Christians. My children are baptized Orthodox Christians. Transgender ideology in its complete entirety violates the doctrines of Orthodox Christianity. Mm-hmm. My wife leaves me, takes my children, and now she can change their religion, take them to some liberal Methodist church or some liberal Lutheran church, and with completely different religious doctrines, in order to justify, castrating my son at 10 years old. This is something that courts just haven't figured out how to deal with, and frankly, as a society, we haven't either.
Yeah, and you're talking about Anne leaving you, but really, this was not a divorce that you went through. This was an annulment instead. Yeah, can you explain the difference in the procedure, both in the prenuptial that you signed? Because there was some misinformation put out about that I found a bit disingenuous and a bit maddening that it was not really discussed more. But if you could discuss that part first, and maybe even if you want to touch a little bit about the religious aspect of your marriage and why the state should even have been able to do anything with your marriage whatsoever, like annul it as it did. I'd love to hear you talk about that, because this too was a religious liberty issue.
Yeah, so one of the remarkable things about my case, I've showed the court filings to probably 200 or 300 lawyers. Mm-hmm. And all of them fall out of their chair when they see that my marriage was annulled. Mm-hmm. I had an airtight prenuptial agreement.
So you thought?
Yeah, and that prenuptial agreement, we had it reviewed by lawyers before the marriage. We had it reviewed 6 months after the marriage. It was signed, everything. In that prenuptial agreement, we revealed all of our real property, all of our financial properties like stock equities, things like that, investment accounts, all of our cash, everything that we'd invested, our entire financial life was exposed to each other in the prenuptial agreement. In addition, we each gave each other our social security numbers, our driver's license number, and an address history for the last 7 years in order so that we could both run background and credit checks on each other, okay? So what the judge concluded in my case was that I had misled Miss Georgioulas about how much money I made before the marriage. And that on that basis, they annulled the marriage.
Wow, go ahead. I think you probably want more to say about that whole thing, but
I'm just pausing for effect. Think about what I just said. Like I know. I have an annulment document where we signed by both parties and both of their attorneys, showing that we had released to everyone our complete financial situation, all all real property, everything. And they found that I had defrauded her and lied to her about my financial situation. The other thing that was just amazing about that was the whole purpose of it was because I had sold my truck to pay for legal expenses. I had sold an F-250 Super Duty. And I took the $40,000 and gave it to my lawyer. The whole purpose of that exercise by the judge was to make me pay that back to her. Now, the way we bought this truck is I gave her the cash and we ran it through her business. And I was a consultant, a marketing consultant on her business. I doubled the number of patients in her practice. And so I paid for the truck. Then Ann was paid for the truck with a business deduction. And then she was paid for the truck again when she won the judgment against me at court. So she was paid for this truck 3 times. But the whole purpose was for the judge to stick me with the money for selling that truck. And she needed to break the prenup in order to do that. And so she did.
Was that Judge? Go ahead.
That was Judge Kim Cooks, 255th District Court in Dallas, Texas. The other thing that was interesting is I filed for findings of fact and conclusions of law. Opposing counsel wrote up trial findings of fact and conclusions of law, and the judge just signed them. So there's 130 of these findings. One of them was that I will do and say anything to get my way. That was actually a finding of the court. The court could tell in the future what I would know and do and say.
Well, the opinion became a fact.
Correct. So, and so what they did is they annulled this marriage in order to break the prenup. Here's the problem. In the process of annulling the marriage, that means that there was never a marriage. There was never a marriage.
Right. Which means that your children.
My children are illegitimate. And that has big implications in the Orthodox Church. Yeah. I have not been able to take communion in the Orthodox Church, for example, because of that. So by one signature of a judge, my children went from born in a marriage to illegitimate, born outside of a marriage.
Do you think that most religious leaders understand how important the issue of annulment, which very rarely happens, and divorce actually is to our religious liberties? I mean, what you're saying, this is something that is horrifying.
It is.
That an individual can cancel an entire denomination, religious, whatever you want to call it, doctrine based on a signature, based on my opinion, which I claim to be a conclusion of fact, and or whatever. I just don't really know, on my whim. I don't like your religion.
Yeah, there's an interest. This is interesting because we have a complete disconnect between what used to be our cultural understanding of what marriage is and what the legal understanding of what marriage is. And we are still clinging to the previous cultural understanding of what marriage is because that previous cultural understanding was right and proper for the development of children and the safety of children. But with the advent of no-fault divorce, you have a new kind of legal regime around marriage. And then you have the punitive Title IV-D laws which incentivize removing the father and create incentives to, in fact, destroy the father financially. You have a system in which men are completely disincentivized from entering into marriage and are completely disincentivized from remaining part of their children's lives. It's cost me close to $1 million just to remain a part of my children's lives 27% of the time. It's cost me almost $1 million. So, you think about a society that would do that to fathers, and you have a society that doesn't care anything about children. It cares nothing about children. The legal regime that's regulating marriage has got to be reformed, or marriage is just as an institution is simply going to go away.